When I worked as a case manager for formerly homeless elders in Boston, every Friday afternoon I would meet with my boss for the gift of supervision. And it was a gift. We sat together and we worked through whatever issues I might have, and he offered me his wisdom and guidance, and it was a gift, and I hope I can provide supervision in the same way. In order to get to his office, I'd have to pass through another office where intakes and service assessments were conducted. Each time I passed, I would read the sign on the wall that said, "So pick a good one." And each time I'd feel a surge of annoyance as I said to myself, if it was as easy as that, we'd all choose to be happy all the time. What a specious, simple-minded slogan. And in all the years I passed through that office, I never changed my mind. But in the years since, I've seen that message often enough that it has continued to poke me and prick at me, and I've wrestled with it and wondered how much truth lies in it. When we do feel alone, isolated, sad, or depressed, after all, we wonder if there is a way out of what John Bunyan called the slough of despond. Maybe if I just readjusted my attitude. We experience times of sadness and gladness, times of exhilaration and times of near despair, times of peace and times of turbulence. In some measure, we are the victims of our emotional states. But is there a way to readjust our attitudes? Or would that be cheating ourselves of the lessons that come along with the dark days? The word joy, I've found out, means different things to different people. Even the dictionaries don't agree. Merriam-Webster says that joy is the emotion evoked by well-being, success, or good fortune, or by the prospect of possessing what one desires, a state of happiness or delight. Dictionary.com says joy is the emotion of great delight or happiness caused by something exceptionally good or satisfying. Keen pleasure, elation. The Cambridge Dictionary says joy is great happiness. Most of these definitions make it clear that to experience joy, there must be an external stimulus. In other words, you can't just adjust your mental attitude to one of joyfulness. You have to be in the presence of something that brings you joy. A definition from Christianity.com makes it clear, though, that there's a difference between joy and happiness from a Christian perspective. Happiness tends to be achieved externally, while joy is something achieved internally. For example, we can feel happy when we receive something like a gift or achieve something like awards or honors. These things are external or belong to the surface of our lives. Happiness is rather superficial. Joy, on the other hand, is something deeper. It is something we feel internally in our lives as human beings. Joy is something to do with our inner nature rather than the outer nature of our human character, close quote. It would seem from this point of view that there is something that we can do to adjust our attitude. In order to allow joy to exist, or even just peace of mind, we can prepare our hearts for joy to enter. When I spoke about joy with a colleague last week, I again found a difference in understanding. For me, joy means an overflowing of the heart in bliss, delight, a fullness and emptiness, you might say. For Susan, joy is a sense of peace and serenity, a feeling of contentedness. In any event, it seems that joy, however we understand it, is a state to be desired. But desire alone is not enough to make joy realizable. It comes of itself, we can prepare ourselves for it, or it can take us by surprise. The first time I can remember feeling joyful, where the experience of delight so completely filled me, I was 7 or 8 years old. One of the old traveling carnivals was in town. It took over the whole parking lot of what would later become the Stop and Shop supermarket near Four Corners in Dorchester. There was probably a carousel and a whip, but the prime attraction, as far as I was concerned, was the Ferris wheel. At length, my mother gave in to my pleas and put aside her concern that the ride was too dangerous, and she bought me a ticket. But she wouldn't ride with me. Such excitement! And the excitement only increased when the bars snapped in to keep us safe, and the seats and the machinery was cranked up, and the cars took us up, 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 and then down again, and then up, up, up again. And after 3 or 4 times, the ride stopped. And I found myself in the topmost car, looking over the whole neighborhood, even catching a glimpse of the buildings, the faraway skyline of Boston. And I felt filled with what I could only call joy. And I said to myself, I'm going to remember this moment forever. And that moment has stayed etched on my heart ever since, even though it was over 60 years ago. It was a moment of joy, up till the moment when I grew conscious of it and pledged to preserve it in the amber of my mind. But you can't preserve joy. It's too transitory, too elusive. It's ephemeral. It can't be captured. The feeling turned from joy to pleasure very quickly. And pleasure is good. Nothing wrong with pleasure. It's an earthly delight, but it's not the joy divine. That comes as suddenly as lightning, and like lightning, leaves its mark. But like lightning, it quickly departs. The point from joy to pleasure, for me, marks the transition point from innocence to experience. In innocence, we experience the world for the first time. The burbling smile of the infant when the mother plays peekaboo, or when the father dangles a shiny object just out of the reach of the baby. The loss of innocence, when the babe grows old enough to understand the nature of parents as distinct others and objects as having an external reality of their own, whether mobile or inert. We value innocence and we value experience, but I would venture to say that of the two, we hold innocence in higher esteem. And yet, we crave experience. One more dimension to the paradox of being human. The contrast between innocence and experience in literature was probably explored more thoroughly by the late 18th century, early 19th century British poet William Blake than by any other in his collection of poems called Songs of Innocence and Experience. I'll share with you now 3 of his poems, which seem to me to best explore that development and that contrast. The first is a simple quatrain called The Lily. The modest rose puts forth a thorn, the humble sheep a threatening horn, while the lily white shall in love delight, nor a thorn nor a threat stain her beauty bright. The simple lily is as innocent can be, no thorns to protect her or to threaten others with. Contrast that with the 2 quatrains of My Pretty Rose Tree. A flower was offered me, such a flower as May never bore. But I said, I've a pretty rose tree, and I passed the sweet flower o'er. Then I went to my pretty rose tree to tend her by day and by night. But my rose turned away with jealousy, and her thorns were my only delight. Such a jealous flower, the rose. The poet was offered the prettiest flower of May, one that we may understand as embodying the innocence of the newborn. But the poet has a pretty flower at home, a flower so delicate and fragrant that others need not be considered. The poet has forgotten, though, that all is not innocent with the rose. And when she turns away, all he's left with is thorns, the hard lesson of experience. The final poem I'll share with you is one of 3 quatrains, and one in which the poet most explicitly explores the shift from innocence to experience, from the innocence of loving life to the experience of accepting death. It's called The Garden of Love. I went to the Garden of Love and saw what I had never seen. A chapel was built in the midst where I used to play on the green, and the gates of the chapel were shut, and "Thou shalt not" was writ on the door. So I turned to the garden of love that so many sweet flowers bore, and I saw it was filled with graves and tombstones where flowers should be, and priests in black gowns were walking their rounds and binding with briars my joys and desires. The garden of love, the garden that held the joy and innocence of childhood, can be visited again in old age and middle age, but the experience will not be the same. The delight that was stimulated in the moments of childhood has been tempered by the experience of living in the world, the experience with pain, conflict, and the reality of death. Joys and desires have been bound up in briars. What an image. Some people today think Blake was a visionary. Many in his own day thought of him as mad. He was a man of faith so pure that he saw reason as a tool of the devil and Isaac Newton as an enemy of biblical truth. Yet there was something Zen-like about his faith. Maria Popova remarks that Blake expressed his view of Jesus in something like a koan when he said, "He is the only God, and so am I, and so are you." She says that at the time of his death, he was cherished for his overwhelming kindness, his capacity for delight even during his frequent and fathomless depressions, and that he had an air of inspiration about him. The joy he found in the natural world came in part through what he brought to it. The tree which moves some to tears of joy, he said, is in the eyes of others only a green thing that stands in the way. As a man is, so he sees. Our experience of the world is determined in no small part by what we bring to it, and that includes our attitude. Joy can catch any of us unaware, but we are more likely to stumble upon it if we keep ourselves prepared. If our approach to life includes an openness, a willingness to observe and embrace, rather than to close ourselves off in judgment. For the child, joy is a natural part of life. Have you seen the online video taken by the father of his 3-year-old daughter? It's almost 12 years old now. Her name was Madeline Dubois, and the video is called Madeline plus Train equals Sheer Delight. Father and daughter are together at a train station in Nashville because Madeline's wish for her 3rd birthday is to ride on a train. Her eyes are as big as blue moons, and she shifts from foot to foot, quivering with excitement as she sees the train approaching. A train! As it approaches, her eyes scan the cars bottom to top and top to bottom again, her mouth agape in wonder as the warning bell sounds, ding, ding, and she takes it all in. Joy, excitement, delight, wonder, all mixed together in a jumble of emotions and perceptions as she absorbs it all, and the pieces come together. The roar of the engine, the peal of the warning bell, the rumble of the wheels on the track, the sheer size and speed of the wondrous vehicle. And as she absorbs all this, the idea of the train and the reality of the train become one thing. And by the time she makes her way up the steps, she's already left some part of that wonder behind as she moves into the world of experience. In time, the magic transcendence of the train will become the routine of experience, maybe daily experience, and she will leave childhood behind. It's a delight to share in her joy as we watch the video, and it's a little sad to think of her leaving that wonder behind. Is there any way that adults can recapture the joy and wonder of those early years? The answer is, I think, not quite. The child's joy comes from watching the train. Our joy comes from watching the child. We can experience joy once again, but always through eyes tempered by experience. The most helpful way I've come to understand the experience of recapturing the freshness theologically is through the work of philosopher Paul Ricoeur and his prescription for reading the Bible. Ricoeur understands that when we approach the Bible or any religious text as children, we do so in a state of naivete. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, Jonah in the belly of the giant fish, Daniel in the lion's den. All these stories we read or hear as literal truth. In the Garden of Paradise, there really was a snake who tempted the mother and father of us all. Eve and Adam ate an actual fruit, and their act of disobedience had the consequence for all of mankind of being cast away forever from this perfect place to a place of conflict, work, woe, and death. A naive understanding. Later, as we gain sophistication, our rational minds and all the attendant understandings brought about by civilization and modernity, we grow skeptical. We develop a critical distance. We can no longer believe these stories, which we regard as fairy tales. We move from naivete to critical distance. For some people, this is the end of the matter. Ricoeur, though, suggests there's another possibility, what he calls a second naivete. In the second naivete, scripture and religious concepts are seen as symbols, metaphorical constructs that we now accept in the full responsibility of our autonomous thought. We move from the faithful stage, in which we read biblical stories as literally true, through a rational stage, which creates a critical distance, to a second naivete, or what some call a mystical stage. We can gain real insight into human behavior and the nature of truth through myth. And you can view the myth as fiction, or you can view it as truth, depending on which lens you view it through. You cannot recapture lost innocence, but you can regain some of the value of innocence, even through the veil of accumulated experience. In the Christian myth that we celebrate through the season of Advent, we can understand that the birth of Jesus, the Christ, brings the joy of relief to those who worry that their lives have no meaning. Our lives will be redeemed through his death, and we will receive everlasting life with him in heaven. Or we can see that there is a cause for joy in the birth of a prophet whose words brought meaning to many on this earth, whose touch brought healing to those who thought they were irredeemably cast out, because that touch was imbued with love. The touch of Jesus brought these poor souls back into the realm of treasured humanity. This is the kind of healing work we can do in the Christmas season and in all seasons. The work will be far from perfect, but we can welcome into the human community of love those who believe themselves to be unlovable and irredeemable. The second candle of Advent, the third candle of Advent, represents joy. We can understand it as a joy of being saved, or as a joy of finding meaning in the service to others.